The pandemic has upended the way the world's children receive their education. In Canada, kids spent weeks and months out of the classroom learning from home. But for lower income countries, the impact has been even more stark. Our next guest says education in those countries is at a crossroads. She's leading a global financing campaign to help address the issue. Julia Gillard served as Prime Minister of Australia from 2010 to 2013. She's now chair of the board of directors at the Global Partnership for Education, the largest global fund dedicated to transforming education in lower income countries. I spoke with her late last week. Julia Gillard, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you.
I wonder if we could start with the big picture here, if we could. I mean, I've got two school-age boys, and I know how much the pandemic has disrupted their education here, in a G7 capital like Ottawa. How has it affected education in lower income countries?
Lower income countries too have had school closures, some of them very long. Actually, at the height of school closures, 1.6 billion children around the world were out of school. But of course, in developing countries, they're happening in a context where there's no video conferencing for classrooms, none of that connectivity. And so GPE, as soon as the pandemic started, decided that we needed to urgently assist countries. We made available $500 million US, and that has assisted 66 countries. And they've taken different pathways to try and maintain educational continuity. Everything from solar-powered preloaded tablets through to classrooms by television and radio, some of it written packs distributed to children's homes. But it is a much harder struggle than for those countries like yours, like mine, where we've got electricity, connectivity and the tools to keep children connected. And it's not just the lost learning, it's also the fear that when schools reopen, that the most marginalised children don't return. We know from when Ebola hit in Africa and schools were closed, that the most at-risk children, particularly the girls, many of them were lost to education for all time. And we're trying to set the systems up so that doesn't happen again.
So you mentioned the $500 million you spent so far, but you're trying to raise $5 billion for this. And I understand Canada has pledged $300 million over a period of 5 years. So how close are you to hitting your goal?
Well, we have our Global Education Summit happening in 2 weeks' time. It's here in London. It's co-hosted by the United Kingdom and also the government of Kenya, so visibly demonstrating the kind of partnership which is so important to us at GPE. So we'll only know at that event where we are in terms of money raised. But we are asking all partners to keep thinking and keep pledging, and even if they've already made a first pledge, to consider what else they can do. This is a moment where we need to decide as a global community, are we going to come out of this crisis stronger and together, including making sure children have a lifetime opportunity to get an education, or are we going to allow this to divide the world? So we at the Global Partnership for Education are very motivated to get everybody to raise their hand for education, is what we say, and to ensure that we can maximise the resources available for education right around the world.
And you mentioned it's not just falling behind, it's marginalized children being driven from the education system entirely. So I wonder broadly, like, what are the consequences for these children in these countries if the education funding isn't increased and if you can't reach this $5 billion goal?
Well, estimates are wargaming off the Ebola experience. People have looked and thought what could happen with the kind of dramatic closures we've seen in so many countries. And the estimates are that between 10 million and 14 million girls could be lost to education. They would be the subject of early marriage or movement into child labour instead of returning to school. So that's just one window on the kind of educational crisis that we're facing. We've got to remember we went into this pandemic with education improving around the world, and we're able to show at Global Partnership for Education countries that there have been improvements. But even with improvements, there were 250 million children out of school before the pandemic, and we certainly don't want to see that number added to. So for those of us who care very passionately about the future of our planet, its peace and prosperity, and making sure every child gets a chance, this really is an incredibly pivotal time.
The pandemic is obviously a significant and rare complication here, but some of these countries, they aren't just low income. Many of them are either unstable or they're in crisis. And we look at Afghanistan as an example, where the Taliban, which we know is violently hostile to educating women and girls, it's retaking much of the country. So how can you make a difference in a place like that, given the situation on the ground?
Well, I'm not going to pretend any of this is easy, and I'm not going to pretend we've got a magic solution. We don't. But we have worked for a long period of time in Afghanistan. We found strategies including training female teachers, because families and communities were more prepared to send girls to school, particularly adolescent girls, if they were in an environment where they were being taught by women. We've had experience working in conflict-affected environments right around the world. Indeed, about half of what we do is in conflict-affected places or fragile places. We've been able to maintain efforts in places like Yemen, to give one example, where conflict continues to rage. And so, we've found ways of working with local actors on the ground in a country-led development model to try and keep improving education, even when the going is incredibly tough.
I guess one other complication is that it is difficult to provide education without vaccination. And we've seen some research from Duke University that estimates the poorest 92 countries won't reach 60% vaccination until 2023. So how does all of that complicate your education goals?
It does complicate education goals. We were very relieved to see that the World Health Organization, when it published its lists about who should be prioritised for vaccines, did indicate that teachers needed some priority, because obviously that helps education systems reopen with some safety and stability for the teachers who are engaged with the children. It's, a world in which there are things that we need to solve together, and vaccines and education go hand in hand, both in the way that you've said, which is right now we need to be vaccinating to make sure we can safely reopen schools around the world. But they go together in another way, which is that the evidence shows that if we educate girls, that they are more likely to marry later, they are more likely to have smaller families, and the children that they do have are more likely to go to school and more likely to be vaccinated. So that is an important key to long-term health sustainability for our world.
Julia Gillard, thank you so much for your time, and good luck with the fundraising efforts.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.